The light in the restaurant was a soft amber, the kind meant to make everything feel warmer than it really is. It reflected off the polished wooden tables and settled gently on the walls, giving the illusion of comfort, of intimacy, of safety. Outside, the sky had just begun to darken, that deep blue moment between day and night when everything feels suspended. I remember noticing all of that before I noticed the knot in my stomach, before I noticed how my hands trembled slightly as I folded my napkin onto my lap. I hadn't eaten all day. Not because I wasn't hungry, but because I was nervous in a way I hadn't been in years. My daughter had invited me to dinner. She had called that morning, her voice light, almost cheerful. "Dad, are you free tonight? I thought we could have dinner together. Just us. Just us." Those two words stayed with me the entire day. I repeated them in my head while shaving, while choosing a clean shirt, while driving across town. Just us. Not rushed. Not distracted. Not a quick coffee in between errands. A real dinner. I told myself not to overthink it. I told myself that parents shouldn't read into everything their grown children say. But hope is a stubborn thing. It sneaks in quietly and settles somewhere deep before you even realize it's there. The last time my daughter and I had sat across from each other like this, without phones buzzing, without someone else present, she was still in college. That was years ago. Life had moved fast since then. Jobs, relationships, disappointments. Distance, not just physical but emotional, had grown slowly, almost invisibly, until one day you look up and realize you no longer know how to talk to your own child without choosing your words carefully. When she walked in, I stood up instinctively. She smiled when she saw me. A polite smile. Controlled. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her makeup understated but precise. She looked confident, self-assured, like someone who had learned how to carry herself in a world that doesn't wait for anyone. "Hi, Dad," she said, leaning in for a quick hug. It was brief. Warm, but brief. Her perfume lingered for a second longer than the embrace itself. "You look good," I said, and I meant it. "So do you," she replied, already reaching for her chair. We sat down, and for a moment there was silence. Not an awkward silence exactly, but a careful one. The kind where both people are measuring their words before letting them out. We ordered. She chose quickly, confidently. I took longer than usual, distracted by the fact that she was really here. That she had asked to see me. The waiter left, and she took a sip of water, glancing around the restaurant as if grounding herself. "How have you been?" she asked. I gave the usual answer. "I'm okay. Keeping busy. You know how it is." She nodded. "Yeah, work's been a lot." We talked about safe things at first. Her job. The city traffic. A mutual complaint about how expensive everything had become. I listened more than I spoke, afraid that if I said too much, I might break whatever fragile thread had brought us here tonight. As she talked, I studied her face. I looked for traces of the little girl who used to sit on the kitchen counter while I made pancakes on Sunday mornings. The teenager who used to roll her eyes at my jokes, but still laughed anyway. The college student who used to call me late at night, voice shaking, asking for advice she pretended she didn't need. Those versions of her felt very far away. The food arrived, and with it, a brief pause in conversation. The clink of cutlery. The quiet hum of voices around us. For a moment, I allowed myself to simply enjoy being there. The warmth. The smell of cooked food. The fact that my daughter had chosen to spend her evening with me. Then she put her fork down. She took a breath. Not a deep one, but a deliberate one. The kind people take when they're about to say something they've rehearsed. "Dad," she said, her voice softer now. "There's something I wanted to talk to you about." My heart skipped, just slightly. "Of course," I said, leaning forward. "What's on your mind?" She looked at her plate, then back up at me. Her eyes were calm, but there was a distance in them I couldn't quite name. "I wouldn't have asked if it wasn't important," she began. I nodded, already telling myself not to jump to conclusions. "It's just things have been really tight lately," she continued. "Rent went up again, and I've had some unexpected expenses." I felt the shift before she finished the sentence. It was subtle but unmistakable. The air between us changed, like a door quietly closing. She kept talking. About bills. About stress. About how hard it is to get ahead these days. Her words were reasonable. Logical. Measured. She wasn't demanding. She wasn't emotional. And that somehow made it hurt more. "I was wondering," she said carefully, "if you might be able to help me out. Just for a bit. Alone, really. I'll pay you back." There it was. The reason for the dinner. The reason for the phone call. The reason for just us. I didn't respond right away. I took a sip of water, giving myself a moment to breathe, to steady the sudden tightness in my chest. How many times had I told myself I wouldn't feel this way again? How many times had I promised myself that I would stop hoping for something more than what was being offered? I smiled gently. How much are we talking about? She told me. The number wasn't small, but it wasn't impossible either. Not for someone in my position. Not for a father. I understand if it's not a good time, she added quickly. I just thought I'd ask. I looked at her, really looked at her. At how composed she was. How prepared. This wasn't a spontaneous request. This was planned. Calculated. The dinner, the timing, the tone. And suddenly memories came rushing back. Not all at once, but like waves, one after another, pulling me deeper into thoughts I had spent years trying not to revisit. I remembered the first time she had asked me for money after moving out. She had sounded embarrassed then, apologetic. I had sent it without hesitation, proud that she trusted me enough to ask. Then there were other times. Always framed as temporary. Always accompanied by promises to pay me back. Some she did. Some she didn't. I never pressed. I never wanted to be that parent. I told myself that this was normal. That this was what parents do. That love isn't measured in balance sheets. But sitting there, under that warm amber light, something inside me felt heavy in a way it hadn't before. Not angry. Not even disappointed. Just tired. I can help, I said slowly. But can I ask you something first? She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Okay. Did you invite me tonight because you wanted to see me? I asked, keeping my voice calm. Or because you needed the money? Her eyes flickered. She looked away, then back at me. I mean both, she said. The honesty was almost refreshing. I've been busy, she continued. And I thought it would be nice to catch up. But yeah, I also needed to talk to you about this. I nodded, absorbing her words. She didn't ask how I was doing beyond that first polite question. She didn't ask about my life, my days, my loneliness. She didn't ask if I was struggling too, in my own quiet ways. I realized then that this dinner wasn't about connection. It was about access. I agreed to help her. I told her I would transfer the money the next day. She relaxed visibly, her shoulders dropping, tension melting away. She smiled again, more easily this time. Thank you, Dad, she said. I really appreciate it. I smiled back, but it felt different now. Like something in me had shifted, quietly, permanently. We finished dinner. She checked her phone a few times. We talked a little more, but the conversation never returned to that earlier sense of possibility. When we stood up to leave, she hugged me again. Another quick hug. Let's do this again sometime, she said. Sure, I replied. I watched her walk out of the restaurant ahead of me, confident, purposeful, already moving on to the next part of her evening. I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine. The streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the windshield. My reflection stared back at me, older than I remembered, eyes tired but alert. For the first time, I allowed myself to ask a question I had avoided for years. When did I stop being her father and start becoming her solution? And more importantly, when did I allow it to happen? That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay in bed listening to the quiet hum of the house, replaying the evening over and over again. Every word, every pause, every look. By morning, something inside me had begun to change. I didn't know it yet, but that dinner wasn't the beginning of reconciliation. It was the beginning of a reckoning. I woke up to the pale gray light of morning pressing through the curtains, the kind that makes the room feel colder than it really is. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was or why my chest felt so heavy. Then the memory of the restaurant, the amber light, her voice saying both, came back in a rush that made me sit up in bed. I stayed there for a long time, hands resting on my knees, listening to the house. It was quiet in the way only an empty home can be quiet. No footsteps. No doors opening. No one calling out from another room. Just the soft ticking of the clock in the hallway, marking time whether I was ready for it or not. I went to the kitchen and made coffee, though I barely tasted it. My phone lay on the counter beside me. I checked it more times than I want to admit, half expecting a message from her. Maybe a thank you sent in the clear light of morning. Maybe a follow-up that showed last night hadn't been just business. There was nothing. After breakfast, I sat at the small desk in the corner of the living room and opened my laptop. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before logging into my bank account. The numbers were familiar. Comfortable. I had always been careful with money, not because I loved it, but because I had learned early on what it feels like to live without it. My daughter had grown up never worrying about whether the lights would stay on or whether there would be food in the fridge. That had been intentional. That had been my pride. I initiated the transfer. As I typed in the amount, my hands hesitated. Not because I couldn't afford it, but because something about the act felt heavier than before. Like each digit carried more weight than its monetary value. I completed the transfer and closed the laptop. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. Got it. Thank you, Red Heart, her message read. That was it. I stared at the heart emoji longer than I should have. It felt oddly out of place, like a decoration added at the end to soften the transaction. I replied with a simple, "You're welcome." And that was the end of it. The rest of the day passed slowly. I went through my usual routines, but everything felt slightly off, like I was moving through a familiar place where the furniture had been rearranged. I tried to distract myself with chores, with errands, with anything that would keep my mind from circling back to the same thoughts. When did our relationship start to feel conditional? I thought back to when she was young, to nights spent sitting on the edge of her bed after a bad dream, assuring her that monsters weren't real and that she was safe. Back then, she had believed me completely. Back then, I had been her protector, not her provider. Somewhere along the way, those roles had blurred. That evening, I found myself pulling out an old photo album from the bottom shelf of the bookcase. I hadn't looked through it in years. The pages were worn, the plastic sleeves slightly yellowed at the edges. There she was, missing front teeth, holding up a crayon drawing of what she insisted was our family. There she was again, standing awkwardly in her first school uniform, clutching her backpack like a shield. I could almost hear her laughter, high and unrestrained, echoing through the years. I wondered if she ever thought about those moments. Or if, to her, they were just distant images, stripped of emotion by time. Over the next few weeks, nothing changed. Or maybe everything did, and I was just beginning to notice. She didn't call. She didn't ask how I was doing. When I reached out with a casual text, the replies were brief. Polite. Efficient. I told myself she was busy. That this was normal for adults. That I was reading too much into things. But then another message came. Hey Dad, can I ask you something? My stomach tightened instinctively. Of course, I replied. This time, the request came quicker. Less explanation. Less preamble. She needed help covering a shortfall. It would only be temporary. Again. I agreed. Again. Afterward, I sat alone in the quiet living room, staring at the blank television screen. I felt foolish for how easily I had said yes. Foolish for the small, stubborn part of me that still hoped each interaction would lead to something more meaningful. It didn't. The pattern became clear after that. Every few weeks, sometimes every couple of months, she would reach out. Always friendly. Always just warm enough to soften the ask. We would exchange a few messages. Sometimes she would suggest coffee, but it rarely happened. There was always something that came up. I began to realize that our relationship now existed almost entirely in moments of need. And the worst part was that I had allowed it. I didn't talk about it with anyone. I didn't want to paint her as ungrateful, or myself as a victim. I told myself this was just part of being a parent. That love meant giving, even when it wasn't reciprocated in the way you hoped. But deep down, something felt wrong. One evening, I ran into an old friend at the grocery store. We chatted briefly in the aisle, catching up on surface-level things. Before we parted, he asked casually, "How's your daughter doing?" I hesitated before answering. "She's busy. Working hard." He smiled. "That's good. You must be proud." "I am," I said, and I meant it. But as I walked away, pushing my cart down the aisle, I felt the familiar ache settle in my chest. Pride and sadness aren't opposites, I realized. They can exist in the same space, tangled together. That night, I made a decision. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden burst of courage or anger. Just a quiet resolve, born out of exhaustion. The next time she asked, I would say no. Not out of spite. Not to teach her a lesson. But because I needed to understand who we were without money standing between us. I didn't have to wait long. Her message came on a Tuesday afternoon. "Hey Dad, I hate to ask again, but I'm in a bit of a bind. Any chance you could help me out one more time?" I stared at the screen. My heart raced, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. This was the crossroads I hadn't known I was approaching. I typed, erased, and retyped my response several times. Finally, I sent it. "I'm really sorry, but I can't help financially right now." The words looked small on the screen. Insignificant. But my hands shook as I put the phone down. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. No response. An hour later, my phone buzzed. "What do you mean you can't?" she wrote. I took a breath before replying. "I mean I'm not able to give you money right now." But I'm here if you want to talk. The typing bubble appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. That's disappointing, she finally replied. I thought I could count on you. That sentence landed harder than I expected. Not because it was cruel, but because it revealed something I had been afraid to admit. Counting on me had come to mean something very specific. I'm still your dad, I wrote back. That hasn't changed. There was a long pause. Then, I don't have time for this right now. I'll figure something else out. And just like that, the conversation ended. Days went by without a word. Then weeks. The silence was louder than any argument could have been. I replayed her last message over and over in my mind. I questioned myself relentlessly. Was I wrong? Was I selfish? Had I failed her by drawing a boundary now, after years of not having one? At night, the doubts were the worst. They crept in when the house was quiet, whispering accusations I couldn't easily dismiss. But alongside the doubt, there was something else. A strange, unexpected sense of relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for my phone to buzz with another request. I wasn't bracing myself for disappointment disguised as connection. I missed her. That didn't go away. But I also felt, for the first time, honest. One afternoon months later, my phone rang. Her name appeared on the screen. My heart jumped. Hello, I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. Hi, Dad, she said. Her voice sounded different. Tired. Stripped of its usual polish. Hi, I replied. There was a pause. A real one. Not the kind filled with rehearsed words. I'm sorry I haven't been in touch, she said quietly. It's okay, I said and meant it. I've been dealing with some things, she continued. And I realized I haven't been fair to you. I listened, my breath shallow, afraid to interrupt. I think I took you for granted, she said. I didn't mean to. I just got used to knowing you'd always be there. My throat tightened. I was always there, I said softly. I know, she replied. And I still want you to be. Just not like that. We talked for a long time that day. Not about money. About life. About stress. About mistakes. About how easy it is to slip into patterns without realizing what they cost. Nothing was magically fixed. Years of distance don't disappear in a single conversation. But something shifted. We started meeting occasionally. Coffee. Walks. Simple things. Sometimes she talked. Sometimes I did. Sometimes we just sat in comfortable silence. She didn't ask for money again. And I didn't offer. Our relationship became quieter, less dramatic, but more real. It was no longer built on obligation or expectation, but on something far more fragile and valuable, choice. Looking back, I understand now that the dinner wasn't about money. Not really. It was about a relationship that had slowly lost its shape, bending under the weight of unspoken assumptions. Setting that boundary didn't make me less of a father. It allowed me to become one again. And that lesson, painful as it was, gave both of us something we had been missing for a long time. A chance to meet each other honestly without conditions. When I think of that restaurant now, of the amber light and the trembling of my hands, I don't feel bitterness. I feel clarity. Because sometimes love isn't proven by how much you give. Sometimes it's proven by knowing when to. Time has a way of softening the sharpest moments, but it doesn't erase them. It reshapes them, sands down the edges until they fit into memory without cutting quite so deeply. In the months that followed that first honest conversation, I noticed how carefully we both moved around each other, like two people learning how to share a space again after years apart. Our meetings were simple. No grand gestures. No forced closeness. Sometimes we met for coffee near her apartment. Sometimes we walked through a small park halfway between our neighborhoods. The kind of places where people passed by without noticing us, where nothing dramatic could happen. And maybe that was the point. At first, our conversations stayed close to the surface. Work, weather, traffic. She would talk about projects she was handling, the pressure she felt to prove herself. I would listen, nodding, offering advice only when she asked. I had learned that silence, when offered with attention, could be more supportive than solutions. There were moments, though, when the past crept in quietly. One afternoon, we were sitting on a bench watching children play near a fountain. A little girl ran past us, laughing, her shoelaces trailing loose behind her. You used to hate tying your shoes, I said without thinking. My daughter smiled faintly. I remember. I'd always ask you to do it for me. You said the knots I made were stronger, I replied. They were, she said, then paused. You always made things feel stable. The word lingered between us. I wanted to tell her how much that meant to me. How much it hurt to feel like that stability had been reduced to something transactional. But I didn't. Not yet. Some truths need time to surface on their own. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, subtly, she began to ask about me. About my days. About how I spent my time. It caught me off guard at first. I wasn't used to being the one asked. "How's work?" she asked one day, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "It's fine," I said. Then, after a moment, "But quieter than it used to be." She looked up. "Do you ever feel lonely?" The question was direct, unguarded. I could have deflected. I almost did. But something in her expression stopped me. "Yes," I said. "Sometimes." She nodded, as if she had expected that answer. "I think I assumed you didn't. Or that you didn't mind." "I minded," I said gently. "I just didn't want to burden you with it." She swallowed. "I never thought of you as someone who needed anything." That sentence explained more than she probably realized. There was a long silence after that. Not uncomfortable. Thoughtful. As our relationship settled into this new shape, I began to see her differently too. Not just as my daughter, but as a person navigating her own fears and failures. I saw the pressure she carried, the way she measured herself against others, the quiet panic that sometimes flickered behind her confidence. And she began to see me not just as a safety net, but as a man with limits. The real test came almost a year later. She called me late one evening. Her voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear something underneath it. "Dad, are you busy?" "No," I said. "What's wrong?" There was a pause. "Can I come over?" I didn't ask questions. Of course. When she arrived, she looked different. Smaller somehow. The confidence she usually wore so carefully was gone, replaced by exhaustion. She sat on the couch, hands clasped together, staring at the floor. "I messed up," she said quietly. I waited. "I made some bad decisions," she continued. "Not with money. With people. I thought I had everything under control, and I didn't." I moved to sit across from her, not too close, but close enough. "Do you want to talk about it?" She nodded. And she did. Slowly at first, then all at once. About a relationship that had drained her emotionally. About ignoring warning signs because she didn't want to be alone. About feeling ashamed for needing help, but needing it anyway. As she spoke, I realized something important. This was what I had wanted all along. Not to be her wallet. Not to be her solution. But to be the place she could land when everything else fell apart. "I don't need money," she said suddenly, as if reading my thoughts. I just didn't know who else to come to. My chest tightened, but this time it wasn't from pain. It was from relief. "I'm glad you came," I said. She stayed for hours that night. We talked, we sat in silence, we watched an old movie she remembered from childhood. When she finally left, she hugged me longer than she had in years. "Thank you for being here," she whispered. That night, after she was gone, I sat alone in the quiet house and understood something that had taken me far too long to learn. Love without boundaries doesn't feel like love. It feels like obligation. And obligation eventually breeds resentment, even when no one means for it to. By stepping back, by saying no when it mattered, I had given us both room to choose each other freely. Our relationship isn't perfect now. We still misunderstand each other sometimes. We still carry the weight of old habits. But there is honesty where there used to be assumption. Respect where there used to be expectation. And when we sit across from each other now, whether at a small cafe or at my kitchen table, the air feels lighter. Not because everything is fixed, but because nothing is being traded. Sometimes I think back to that first dinner. The amber light. The carefully chosen words. The realization that hurt more than I was prepared for. I don't wish it away. Because that moment forced me to confront a truth I had been avoiding. That love, to survive, must be rooted in mutual care, not quiet sacrifice. My daughter didn't invite me to dinner just to ask for money. She invited me because we were both trapped in a version of our relationship that no longer worked. And letting that version go, painful as it was, gave us something better in its place. Not perfection, but something real. The weeks after that night carried a different kind of weight. Not heavy, not urgent, but deliberate. Like every interaction now mattered a little more, because neither of us wanted to break what we had finally begun to rebuild. She started calling more often. Sometimes just to tell me something small, something ordinary. A funny moment at work. A meal she had tried to cook and failed miserably. Once, she called simply to complain about the rain and how it made the whole city feel slower. Those calls were short, unremarkable by most standards, but to me they felt monumental. They weren't attached to anything. No request followed. No tension lingered underneath. just her voice reaching out because she wanted to. I didn't comment on it. I didn't thank her for calling or make a big deal out of it. I had learned that love grows best when it isn't constantly examined under a microscope. One Sunday afternoon, she came over again. This time, she brought groceries with her. Bags of them. She set them down on the kitchen counter and looked at me, almost defiantly. "I'm cooking today," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" She laughed, a real laugh, the kind that reached her eyes. "Probably. We cooked together, or at least attempted to." She chopped vegetables too unevenly. I kept forgetting where I put things in my own kitchen. We bumped into each other more than once, laughing and apologizing like strangers learning each other's rhythms. At one point, she stopped and looked around. "This place hasn't changed much," she said. "I haven't either," I replied, half joking. She smiled, then grew quiet. "I think I assumed you were frozen in time, just waiting for me to show up when I needed something." I leaned against the counter. I was living my life, just a quieter version than before. She nodded, processing that. When we sat down to eat, the food wasn't great. Too salty. Slightly overcooked. But neither of us complained. We ate slowly, talking about nothing and everything. Afterward, she helped clean up without being asked. That small act stayed with me longer than it should have. A few months later, she invited me to dinner again. This time, the invitation came casually, almost offhand. "There's a new place near my apartment," she said over the phone. "Want to check it out with me?" My chest tightened for just a second, the memory of that first dinner flashing through my mind. But this time, there was no rehearsed tone. No careful build-up. "Sure," I said. The restaurant was different from the last one. Brighter. Louder. Less intimate. We sat at a small table by the window. She talked about a promotion she might be up for. I listened, genuinely happy for her. Halfway through the meal, she stopped and looked at me. "I want you to know something," she said. I waited. "I didn't realize how much I was hurting you," she continued, "or how much I was using our relationship as a shortcut when things got hard." I swallowed. "I don't think you meant to." "I know," she said, "but intention doesn't erase impact." She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. She slid it across the table toward me. "What's this?" I asked. "It's not everything," she said quickly, "but it's a start. I've been putting aside money for a while." I didn't touch the envelope. "This isn't about repayment," I said gently. "I know," she replied. "This is about accountability." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something new there. Not guilt. Not obligation. Responsibility. I accepted the envelope, not because I needed the money, but because I understood what it represented. "Thank you," I said. She nodded, relief washing over her face. As time went on, our relationship found its own quiet rhythm. We didn't talk every day. We didn't need to. There was an understanding now that space didn't equal distance. I started sharing more of myself too. My fears about getting older. My worries about health. The strange emptiness that sometimes crept in during evenings when the house felt too large. She listened. Sometimes she offered comfort. Sometimes she just sat with me in the discomfort. One evening, as we walked through the same park where we had sat months earlier, she stopped suddenly. "Dad," she said, "why didn't you say something sooner?" I knew what she meant. "I was afraid," I admitted. "Afraid that if I said no, I'd lose you completely." She looked down at the ground. "I think I was afraid too. Afraid that if I didn't need you, you wouldn't stay." We stood there, two people facing the same fear from opposite sides. "I would have stayed," I said. "I just didn't know how to show it without giving." She reached for my arm. "I know now." That night, after we parted ways, I walked home slowly. The air was cool, the streetlights casting familiar shadows on the pavement. I felt something settle inside me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was honest. Looking back, I understand now that that first dinner wasn't a betrayal in the way I thought it was. It was a mirror. It showed me the role I had allowed myself to play, and the cost of playing it silently. My daughter didn't change overnight. Neither did I. But we both learned something essential. Love doesn't mean always saying yes. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is risk being misunderstood in order to be real. And when you do, you might just find that the relationship you feared losing was waiting on the other side of honesty all along. The years didn't suddenly become easier after that. Life rarely offers that kind of clean ending. But they became steadier, and steadiness, I learned, was its own quiet gift. My daughter and I found a rhythm that didn't rely on urgency or need. Birthdays were celebrated without awkwardness. Holidays no longer felt like obligations that had to be negotiated. Sometimes she came over just to sit on the couch and scroll through her phone while I read, each of us comfortable enough not to perform for the other. One evening, as we washed dishes together after dinner, she said something that stopped me. "I used to think love was about proving your value," she said, staring into the sink. "Being useful. Being needed." I dried my hands slowly. "I used to think the same thing," I admitted. "I thought if I stopped giving, I'd stop mattering." She turned to look at me then. "Really look at me. You matter," she said. "You always did. I just didn't know how to show it back then." That was when I realized something important. Forgiveness doesn't always come in the form of an apology. Sometimes it comes in changed behavior. Sometimes it comes quietly, without ceremony, woven into ordinary moments like washing dishes or walking side by side without speaking. I never became harder. I never became colder. I simply became clearer. And clarity, I discovered, is an act of love. Years from now, I know I won't remember the exact amount of money I gave her, or the dinners that were motivated by need instead of connection. What I will remember is the moment I chose honesty over fear. The moment I decided that love deserved truth, even if truth risked distance. Ironically, truth is what brought us closer. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's this. Children don't stop needing their parents when they grow up. They just need them differently. And parents don't stop loving their children when they set boundaries. They finally give that love a chance to breathe. That dinner wasn't the night I lost my daughter. It was the night I stopped losing myself. And in doing so, I gained a relationship that finally felt real.